The wind howled across the high plains of Wyoming, a mournful cry that scraped the dry grass and rattled the weathered boards of a lonely ranch house. It was a land of vast skies, an unforgiving earth where the sun burned like a judgment and the nights froze a man's breath in his chest. Elias Holt, a cowboy of 36, lived in this isolation, his days marked by the creak of saddle leather and the lowing of his small herd. 6 years had passed since his wife, Leela, died in childbirth. Taking their infant son with her, grief clung to Elias like the fine dust that coated his world, dulling the edges of everything, making survival a habit rather than a choice. Elias was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with hands calloused from rope and wood, his face lined from squinting into the sun. His dark brown eyes, once warm, now carried a hollow weight, and his chestnut hair, streaked with early gray, fell loose under a worn Stetson. He avoided the nearest town, Redstone, a 2-day ride away, where pitying glances or suspicious whispers followed him. The ranch was his refuge and his cage, its sparse cabin holding a cot, a rough table, and a fireplace that smelled of wood smoke and loss. He tended his cattle, mended fences, and cooked solitary meals, the wind his only companion, its Wayla, mirror to his heart. One late afternoon, as the sky bled crimson and gold, a storm brewed on the horizon, dark clouds rolling like a warning. Elias rode the northern fence line, his coat flapping in the rising wind, the scent of rain sharp in the air. His horse snorted, uneasy, as Elias spotted movement near a dry gully. At first, he thought it was a stray calf, but as he drew closer, his grip tightened on the reins. It was a person, small and still, huddled against the sagebrush, half hidden by the gathering dusk. He dismounted, his rifle loose in his calloused hands, scanning the empty plains for danger. The wind whipped his hair across his face, carrying dust and the promise of a downpour. Approaching cautiously, Elias saw it was a young woman, her clothes torn, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood. Her black hair, tangled with twigs, spilled across her shoulders, and a jagged scar ran from her temple to her jaw, stark against her sun-darkened skin. She was curled tightly, her breath shallow, a low moan escaping as the wind buffeted her. Her left arm was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken, and a crude knife lay clutched in her right hand, trembling in her weak grasp. Elias's heart stirred, a flicker of concern piercing his guarded solitude. She was no threat, only a soul in pain, lost in his harsh world. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling a safe distance away, his voice rough from disuse. "You hurt?" Her dark eyes, wide with fear and pain, snapped open, and she flinched, trying to scramble back despite her injuries. The knife wavered, a futile defense. Elias raised his empty hands, palms out. "Easy, I ain't gonna harm you." Her breathing hitched, her gaze darting between him and the endless plains. She didn't understand his words, but his calm posture seemed to register. Her lips, cracked and dry, parted, but no sound came. The storm's first drops fell, heavy and cold, and Elias knew he couldn't leave her here. "I'm gonna help you," he said, pointing to her arm, then to his distant ranch house, its silhouette faint against the stormy sky. "Shelter, medicine." Her eyes narrowed, fear warring with desperation, but she nodded slightly, the knife slipping from her hand to the dust. Elias moved slowly, lifting her as gently as he could, her sharp gasp of pain cutting through the wind. She was light, frail beneath her torn dress, her body rigid with fear. He mounted his horse, holding her securely against his chest, and rode toward the cabin as the rain began to lash the prairie, the wind's wail growing fiercer. Inside the cabin, Elias set her on the cot by the fireplace, its sparse interior glowing with fresh kindling. She curled in on herself, shivering, her dark eyes scanning the room, cot, table, shelves of supplies as if expecting a threat. Elias fetched a cloth and water, his movements deliberate to avoid startling her. As he cleaned the dirt from her face, her scar stood out, intricate and old, a story he didn't yet know. Her arm was badly broken, and dehydration had cracked her lips. The wind howled outside, rattling the door, but inside, a fragile trust flickered in the firelight. Who was this scarred woman, and what secret had driven her to Elias's lonely plains. The Wyoming plains stretched endless under a sky bruised with storm clouds, the wind's mournful wail rattling the clapboard walls of Elias Holt's ranch house. Inside, the cabin glowed with the soft light of a fire, its warmth pushing back the chill of a rain-soaked night. Elias, a cowboy of 36, knelt by the cot where Tala, the injured woman he'd found in the gully, lay shivering. Her black hair, tangled with twigs, framed a face marked by a jagged scar from temple to jaw. Her dark eyes wide with pain and weariness, her broken arm hung limp, her torn dress stained with dust and blood. Elias's chestnut hair, streaked with gray, fell loose under his Stetson as he moved carefully, his dark brown eyes steady with a concern he hadn't felt since losing his wife, Leela, 6 years ago. The storm roared outside, its rain lashing the cabin, but inside, the crackle of kindling offered a fragile sanctuary. Elias fetched a clean cloth and a basin of water, his calloused hands deliberate to avoid startling Tala. "Gonna clean you up," he said softly, his voice rough from years of silence. He wiped the dirt from her face, revealing the full extent of her scar-old, intricate, a story etched in pain. She flinched at his touch, her knife now abandoned in the dust, her dark eyes tracking his every move. Her lips, cracked from dehydration, parted slightly as she watched him, fear battling a flicker of desperate trust. Elias examined her arm, confirming a clean break in the forearm. He'd set broken bones before his own ribs once, a neighbor's shoulder, but this felt different, heavier. He gathered supplies, clean rags, soft cloth for padding, and a flat sticks from his fence-mending pile. "This'll hurt," he said, gesturing to her arm, his voice low but steady. "I'll be quick." Tala's eyes narrowed, her breath hitching, but she nodded, bracing herself. He worked swiftly, aligning the bone with a gentle but firm hand, her sharp gasp cutting through the wind's howl. Tears welled in her dark eyes, but she bit her lip, silent, her endurance fierce. He bound the sticks with cloth, creating a splint, and tied her arm across her chest with a wider strip, forming a sling. Exhausted, Tala sagged against the cot, her shivering easing as the fire warmed the room. Elias offered a canteen of water and a piece of cornbread from his larder. She drank slowly, her throat working, then took the bread, eating small bites, her gaze never leaving him. The cabin was sparse-got, rough table, 2 chairs, shelves of supplies, but it held the scent of wood smoke and leather, a stark contrast to the storm's fury outside. Elias pulled a chair near the fire, giving her space, his Stetson on the table, his hands idle for the first time in years. Grief had dulled his world, but Tala's presence stirred something, a spark of purpose, faint but undeniable. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the plains sharp and clean under a vast blue sky. Tala slept fitfully, her scar stark in the dawn light filtering through the cabin's single window. Elias checked his herd, the lowing of cattle a familiar rhythm, but his thoughts stayed with the woman on his cot. Redstone, the nearest town, was 2 days away, a place of gossip and judgment he avoided. Bringing her there wasn't an option, not with her injuries, not with the fear in her eyes, but leaving her alone in the wild was unthinkable, a betrayal of the decency stirring beneath his solitude. Returning to the cabin, Elias found Tala awake, sitting up, her dark eyes less fearful but still cautious. She touched the splint, testing it, then looked at him, her voice a soft, halting whisper. "Why help?" Her English was broken, accented, but clear enough. Elias paused, his dark brown eyes meeting hers. "Couldn't leave you out there," he said simply, pointing to the plains. "Not right." She studied him, her scar catching the light, and nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement. He offered more water, and she took it, their fingers brushing a fleeting warmth that felt like a promise in the firelight. Outside, the wind carried a new sound, faint but sharp, the creak of saddle leather, distant but approaching. Elias's hand tightened on his rifle, his gaze flicking to the horizon. Someone was coming, and in this lonely land, visitors rarely meant good news. Who was riding toward the ranch, and what danger followed Tala's fragile trust? The Wyoming plains shimmered under a vast blue sky, The wind's mournful wail softened to a sigh as the storm's remnants faded. Elias Holt's ranch house stood solitary, its clapboard walls weathered by years of sun and solitude. Inside, Tala, the injured woman Elias had rescued, sat on the cot by the fireplace, her black hair loose, her jagged scar stark against her sun-darkened skin. Her dark eyes, less fearful now, followed Elias as he moved through the cabin. His chestnut hair streaked with gray, his dark brown eyes steady under his worn Stetson. The splint on Tala's broken arm held firm, but her ribs ached with each breath, her torn dress patched with one of Elias's old shirts. The distant creak of saddle leather from the previous night lingered in his mind, a warning that trouble was near. Days had passed since the storm, and Tala's strength was returning. Slow but sure, she rose stiffly, testing her weight on her bruised leg, her movements careful but deliberate. Elias watched from the table, his calloused hands idle, a tin cup of coffee cooling in his grip. Grief had kept him tethered to this lonely ranch since losing his wife, Leela, and their son 6 years ago, but Tala's presence stirred something, a flicker of purpose. Like a spark in dry grass, he offered her a plate of biscuits, their edges charred from his rough cooking, and she took one, her dark eyes meeting his with a cautious nod. Their silence wasn't empty anymore. It was watchful, a bridge forming between two solitary souls. Tala began to help with small chores, her good hand folding blankets or sweeping the dirt floor with a worn broom. Her grace, even in pain, softened the cabin's starkness, its wood smoke and leather scent mingling with her quiet presence. One morning, as Elias chopped wood outside, Tala joined him, carrying kindling with her uninjured arm, her scar catching the sunlight. "Why you stay alone?" she asked, her English halting but clearer, her voice soft as the prairie breeze. Elias paused, his axe still, his dark brown eyes distant. "Lost my wife, Leela. Sickness took her, and our boy," he said, his voice rough but steady, easier to keep the world out. Tala's eyes softened, a shared sorrow flickering in their depths. She touched her scar, her fingers trembling. "My people say this bad. Send me away." Her words were sparse, but the pain behind them cut deep, echoing Elias's own loss. Banished for a mark she didn't choose, she'd wandered alone, until the gully where he found her. He nodded, setting the axe down. "Ain't bad to me," he said, his gaze steady. "Just you." Her lips parted, a faint smile breaking through, the first he'd seen, transforming her scarred face with quiet strength. Their days settled into a rhythm, feeding chickens, checking cattle, sharing meals at the rough table. Elias taught her words: fire, horse, sun. She offered Apache terms: "Wicha iwi woman, wicha thank you." Her voice soft but sure. Their exchanges were simple, a patchwork of languages and gestures, but each word built a fragile trust. One evening, as the sky burned orange, Tala sat by the fire, mending a tear in Elias's coat with a needle and thread. He watched, his Stetson on the table, the memory of Lila's gentle hands fading against Tala's steady presence. Their eyes met, a warmth passing between them, unspoken but real. But the plains held no secrets for long. The creak of saddle leather from that stormy night returned, closer now, as Elias repaired a fence under the noon sun. He spotted dust rising on the horizon. 3 riders, their shadows long and sharp. His gut tightened. Redstone's folk rarely ventured this far without cause. Tala, gathering eggs nearby, froze, her dark eyes wide, her hand clutching the basket. Elias straightened, his rifle leaning against a post, his Stetson low. "Inside," he said, his voice low but urgent. Tala hesitated, her scar stark in the sunlight, then nodded, hurrying to the cabin, the door shutting with a soft thud. The riders approached, their spurs glinting, their faces hard under wide-brimmed hats. Elias recognized Caleb Morse, a Redstone rancher with a mean streak, leading the group. The wind carried their voices, sharp with suspicion, and Elias's hand rested near his rifle, his heart heavy with the weight of protecting a stranger who was no longer just a stranger. Who were these riders? And what threat did they bring to Tala's fragile sanctuary? The Wyoming plains lay stark under a noon sun, its glare harsh on the dry grass and the weathered clapboards of Elias Holt's ranch house. The wind, ever present, carried a faint creak of saddle leather, a warning that echoed in Elias's chest. As he stood by the fence, his worn Stetson low, his dark brown eyes scanning the horizon, Tala, the injured woman he'd rescued, stood nearby, her black hair loose, her jagged scar vivid against her sun-darkened skin, her dark eyes, once wide, with fear, now held a quiet strength as she clutched a basket of eggs, her splinted arm steady in its sling. Elias's calloused hands gripped a fence post, his rifle close. The memory of his wife Lila's loss 6 years ago. A shadow that Tala's presence was slowly brightening. 3 riders emerged from the dust, their spurs glinting, their faces hard. Under wide-brimmed hats, Caleb Morse, a Redstone rancher with a cruel streak, led them. His gray eyes cold, his beard flecked with tobacco. Elias sent Tala inside, his voice low. Locked the door. She hesitated, her scar catching the sunlight, then obeyed, the cabin door shutting with a thud that felt final. Elias faced the riders, his broad shoulders squared, his Stetson casting a shadow across his lined face. The wind whipped his chestnut hair, streaked with gray, as he rested a hand near his rifle, his heart pounding with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. Caleb reined in his horse, dust swirling around him, his grin sharp as a blade. Holt, he drawled, folks say you're hidin' a savage. Marked one, at that, his men Jeb, lean and twitchy, and Amos, burly with a scarred lip shifted, their hands near their revolvers. Elias's jaw tightened, his dark brown eyes unyielding. She's hurt, Morse, needed help. That's all you need to know. Caleb spat into the dust, his gray eyes narrowing. Don't sit right. You keepin' an Apache on your land. Redstone don't like it. Hand her over, or we'll take her. Tala, inside the cabin, pressed against the wall, her dark eyes peering through a crack in the shutters. Her good hand gripped a kitchen knife, her breath shallow, the memory of banishment burning in her chest. Elias's voice carried through. The wood, steady and cold. She's under my roof. My responsibility. Ride on, Caleb. The air crackled with tension, the wind howling as if urging a fight. Jeb's hand twitched toward his revolver, but Elias raised his rifle, the barrel. Steady. Don't, he said, his voice a low growl. Last chance. Caleb's grin faded, his eyes glinting with malice. You're mackin' enemies, Holt. Town won't stand for this consortin' with a marked outcast. He gestured at the cabin, his voice dripping with scorn. She's trouble, cursed maybe. You'll regret this. Elias didn't flinch, his rifle unwavering. That's my problem. Get off my land. The riders hesitated, Amos muttering under his breath. But Caleb raised a hand, his gaze venomous. We'll be back, he snarled, turning his horse. The trio rode off, dust trailing like a threat, their shadows long in the noon light. Elias lowered his rifle, his hands shaking slightly, the weight of his choice settling heavy. He'd faced down men for Tala, a stranger who'd become more. Her quiet strength chipping at the walls he'd built since Lila's death. He entered the cabin, finding Tala by the window, her knife still clutched, her dark eyes wide with awe and fear. You fight for me, she asked, her English halting, but clear, her scar stark in the dim light. Elias set his rifle down, his Stetson on the table, and met her gaze. Couldn't let him take you. He said softly, ain't right. Tala's fingers loosened on the knife, her lips trembling with a faint smile. She stepped closer, her good hand brushing his arm, a touch that carried warmth through the cabin's wood smoke scent. Thank you, she whispered, her Apache accent softening the words. A spark of trust glowing in her eyes. Elias nodded, his dark brown eyes softening. A silent vow forming between them. They sat by the fire, sharing a meal of beans and cornbread. The silence no longer heavy, but shared, a bridge over their separate griefs. Outside, the plains stretched endless, but Redstone's whispers were closer now, carried on the wind. Caleb's threat lingered, a shadow darker than the gully where Elias had found Tala, hinting at trouble yet to come. What danger did Caleb's vow bring? And what secret lay behind Tala's scarred past? The Wyoming plains stretched boundless under a merciless sun, its glare scorching the dry grass and casting stark shadows across Elias Holt's weathered ranch. House the wind, a constant mournful presence, wove through the sagebrush, carrying whispers of trouble that pricked at Elias's instincts. Inside the clapboard cabin, Tala, the banished Apache woman he'd rescued, moved with a quiet strength, her black hair tied back with a strip of cloth, her jagged scar vivid from temple to jaw against her sun-darkened skin, her dark eyes, once clouded with fear, now burned with resilience, her splinted arm steady in its sling, her torn dress patched with one of Elias's old shirts. Elias, 36, stood outside, his chestnut hair gray-streaked under his worn Stetson, his dark brown eyes scanning the horizon. Caleb Morse's threat, "We'll be back," a weight heavier than the rifle at his side. 6 years had passed since Elias lost his wife, Leela, and their infant son to childbirth, grief settling like dust, coating his world in gray. Tala's presence had shifted that solitude. Her quiet grace a spark in the cabin's starkness. She tended a small herb garden near the porch, her knowledge of desert plants sage for healing, yucca for pain a gift from her past. Elias taught her English words, fence, water, home, his voice rough but patient. She shared Apache terms, Wicha-e fire, Biwi-e sky, her voice soft as the prairie breeze. Their evenings by the fire were filled with shared silences, their hands brushing as they passed plates of cornbread and beans, a warmth growing that eased the ache of Elias's loss. Tala mended his coat, her needle steady, her scar catching the firelight, and Elias found himself watching her, his Stetson on the table, a smile tugging at his lips, a rare defiance of his grief. One morning, as Tala fed the chickens, her good hands scattering grain, Elias repaired a fence, his calloused hands deft with wire and hammer. Their rhythm was a quiet harmony, their bond a bridge over their separate sorrows. But the plains held no peace for long. Dust rose on the horizon, heavier than before. 5 riders, their spurs glinting, their shadows sharp in the noon light. Elias dropped his hammer, his dark brown eyes narrowing, his Stetson low as he grabbed his rifle. "Inside, Tala," he said, his voice tight with urgency. She froze, her dark eyes flashing with resolve, her hand clutching the basket. "I stay," she whispered, her English halting but firm. Elias shook his head. "Not safe, lock the door." She hesitated, her scar stark in the sunlight, then nodded, hurrying to the cabin. The door shutting with a heavy thud. The riders approached, Caleb Morse at the lead, his gray eyes cold as steel, his beard flecked with tobacco. Flanking him were Jeb, lean and twitchy, Amos, burly with a scarred lip, and a new Mensilas, a weary tracker with shifty brown eyes, and Ben, a young hothead with a revolver and a sneer. "Holt." Caleb barked, reining in his horse, dust swirling like a storm. "Your harbor in a cursed Apache. Redstone's done with it. Hand her over, or we burn this place to ash." Elias stood firm, his broad shoulders a wall between the cabin and the riders, his rifle steady. "She ain't cursed," he said, his voice low and cold. "She's hurt, and she's mine to protect. Ride on, or you'll regret it." Inside, Tala pressed against the wall, her good hand gripping a kitchen knife, her dark eyes peering through a crack in the shutters. Caleb's words cut deep, echoing her banishment, her people's elders branding her scar a bad sign. After a drought struck their camp, blaming her for their suffering. Jeb's hand twitched toward his revolver, and Ben spat into the dust. "Town says she's bad luck." Ben sneered. "You're a fool, Holt, livin' with a marked savage." Elias's jaw clenched, his dark brown eyes unyielding. "She's more than your lies. Get off my land." A new voice broke the tension, sharp and defiant. "She ain't bad luck, Ruth Carver." A Redstone widow rode up alone, her gray hair loose under a faded bonnet, her brown eyes blazing with conviction, shunned for her sharp tongue. Ruth had seen Tala's herb garden from a distance, heard whispers of Elias's stand, and defied Redstone's gossip to come. "She's a healer, not a curse," Ruth declared, her voice slicing through the wind. The plot twist landed like a thunderbolt. Tala's scar wasn't a mark of shame, but a ritual scar from a healing ceremony gone wrong. Her skills blamed for a drought that drove her banishment. Her herbs had saved lives before her people turned. On her a truth Redstone's prejudice buried. Caleb's face twisted, his gray eyes narrowing. "Don't change nothin'," he growled. "She don't belong here." Silas reached for his gun, but Elias raised his rifle, the barrel steady. "Don't test me," he said, his voice a low growl. Ruth's presence shifted the air, her bonnet swaying as she glared at the riders. "You're the curse, Morse, poison in this town with hate." Ben's bravado faltered, Amos muttering, but Caleb raised a hand, his gaze venomous. "This ain't over, Holt," he spat, turning his horse. The riders retreated, dust trailing like a warning, their threat lingering in the wind's wail. Elias lowered his rifle, his hands trembling, the weight of his stand heavy but right. He turned to find Tala at the door, her knife lowered, her dark eyes wide with awe and gratitude. "You protect me," she whispered, her English halting, her good hand touching his arm, a warmth that burned through his grief. "Always," Elias said, his dark brown eyes soft, a vow sealed in the firelight. Ruth nodded, her brown eyes warm. "You got friends, Holt," she said, mounting her horse. But as she rode off, a glint of steel flashed in the sagebrush. A hidden watcher, their shadow long and unseen. Who was the watcher in the sagebrush? And what secret did Tala's scar still hide? The Wyoming plains glowed under a dawn sky painted in hues of gold and rose. The wind's mournful wail softened to a whisper, as if the land itself held its breath for a reckoning. Elias Holt's ranch house stood firm, its clapboard walls weathered, but unyielding, a haven for two outcast souls. Inside, Tala, the banished Apache woman, sat by the fire, her black hair loose, her jagged scar catching the light, her dark eyes fierce with a strength forged in pain. Her splinted arm, now nearly healed, rested in her lap, her patched dress a testament to survival. Elias, 36, stood by the door, his chestnut hair gray-streaked under his Stetson, his dark brown eyes scanning the plains, the glint of steel in the sagebrush from the previous day a shadow on his heart. The standoff with Caleb Morse and his riders had shaken the ranch's quiet. Ruth Carver's revelation, Tala's scar marking her as a healer, not a curse igniting a spark in Elias's grief-worn soul. Tala's herb garden thrived near the porch, her knowledge of sage and yucca a quiet defiance of her banishment. They'd built a life together, sharing meals of cornbread and beans, teaching each other words English home, Apache Wichee. Fire, their silences filled with a warmth that eased Elias's loss of his wife, Leela, and their son. But Caleb's threat lingered, and the unseen watcher in the sagebrush promised trouble darker than Redstone's prejudice. As noon approached, dust rose again, heavier now. 6 riders, their spurs glinting, their shadows sharp against the plains. Elias gripped his rifle, his Stetson low, his broad shoulders tense. Tala stood beside him, her dark eyes steady, a kitchen knife in her good hand. "I fight," she said, her English halting but resolute. Elias shook his head, his voice low. "Not alone." The riders halted, Caleb at the lead, his gray eyes cold, flanked by Jeb, Amos, Silas, Ben, and a new figure, Lena Morse, Caleb's sister, her hazel eyes sharp, a leather satchel at her side. "Last chance, Holt," Caleb growled. "Hand over the Apache, or we end this." Tala stepped forward, her scar blazing in the sunlight, her voice clear. "I am Tala, not curse, healer." Her words echoed Ruth's truth, but Caleb sneered, his hand on his revolver. "Healer or not, you don't belong." Lena dismounted, her satchel falling open, revealing a bundle of letters, Apache writings, stolen from Tala's people, exposing their healer's ritual gone wrong, the drought that led to her banishment. The plot twist struck like a lightning bolt. Lena, the watcher in the sagebrush, had been Caleb's spy, but her hazel eyes held guilt, not malice. "She saved my child once," Lena said, her voice trembling, "before they cast her out. I kept these to remember." The crowd stilled, Caleb's face twisting with rage. "You betray us?" he roared, drawing his gun. Elias raised his rifle, but Ruth rode up, her bonnet swaying, her brown eyes fierce. "Enough," she shouted, joined by two Redstone townsfolk, Clara, a baker, and young Tom, a stable hand who'd heard Lena's tale. "Tala's no curse," Clara said, her apron dusted with flour. "She's one of us, The riders hesitated, Silas lowering his gun, Ben's bravado faltering. Caleb lunged, but Elias fired a warning shot into the dust, the crack echoing across the plains. "Leave," Elias said, his voice steel, "or you answer to me." Lena stepped between them. Her letters raised. "This ends, Caleb," she said. Her voice steady. "She's no threat." Caleb's gray eyes burned, but his men backed off, outnumbered by truth. He mounted his horse, spitting into the dust. "You'll pay, Holt," he snarled, riding off. His men trailing, the plains fell silent, the wind carrying away their threat. Tala's hand found Elias's, her dark eyes wet with gratitude. "You, my home," she whispered, her scar softened by her smile. Elias squeezed her hand. His Stetson tilted back, his dark brown eyes warm. "Always," he said, a vow etched in the dawn's light. They rebuilt their life on the ranch. Tala's garden blooming, Elias's grief easing in her presence. They shared evenings under the stars. Her head on his shoulder, their bond a quiet. Love forged in defiance. Redstone's whispers faded, replaced by nods at the summer market, where Tala sold her herbs, her scar a badge of resilience. The Old West taught that justice begins when prejudice falls, a lesson carved in their joined. Hence, if their stand moves you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of courage and love. Share your thoughts below. Did Tala's strength inspire you? But as they watched the stars, Lena's letters held one final secret, what truth still lay buried in Tala's past.